number of different provisions to it. Those are your ordinances. You can change those anytime you want to. The amount that you pay or the amount you set your fee schedules, you can change those anytime that you want to. But the substantive provisions as published, you have to only amend by the process that the state tells us to. And that's usually either governed in Title 24 or sometimes there's provisions in the state housing law that we have to look to too, that some of the provisions are affected. It's a complex document. But
okay, to that effect.
Yes.
The height of fences that are required to have a permit and things that Michael has brought up, that's not, I mean, these aren't
right.
big things.
No, that's what I'm saying. There are a number of things that aren't mandated that are in here that you can go back and adjust later, whether you want to charge for something, whether you want to have a permit for something, what your local standards are for things that aren't mandated in the code. So one of the things that we would have to do is go back and, to your point, what code would we use? What's mandated under the code? What have we made more intense because of our local climatological or geological variants? And what have we just added? And once you've looked at those, separated into those three categories, you know that, all right, if it's published in the state code, you pretty much can't touch it unless you're going to make it more intense. If you've made it more, if you're going to do that, you have to have that in place. If you've put that in place, you can roll that back, but you can't subsequently come up and make it more intense once the codes go into effect. If it's something that the city has adopted itself, fencing material, height of fence, your ordinance, you can amend that, repeal that anytime you want to. Whether or not you want to charge a specific amount for a permit or give a refund or what penalty provision should be, you can adjust those separate time. So I'm sorry it's that complex, but it would take some time. It's not impossible to do, to just break it down into those categories to let you know what's imposed by the state, what's open for you to adjust anytime you want to, what local variants you've put in place, whether you want to keep those or roll those back. That could be done. I don't think that's going to happen between now and December when we have to have this in place. But that can take place in the new year. And I think you can make substantive streamlining amendments after you've had some time to work with your staff and work through the policy. I mean, it's a very significant policy change. You'd want to take some time to really talk about all of those things to see what the impact of that is going to be. But I think you could do that.
Thank you for that overview, because that was the bottom line question I was going to have.
Yeah.
What is the consequence if we do or do not adopt? And I think you just provided that explanation. And in all of the conversation, particularly what Michael has brought up, are some very, very critical things that belong at council policy discussion. And I think, looking downstream, we've got some intent to hold some strategic planning discussions, and that could be an integral part of that, to do exactly what you're advocating, is dissect this and decide what can we reasonably streamline, bearing in mind all the different factors of revenue, because revenue has to be factored into it, but ease of process and facilitating and streamlining where we can. I think that it's all worthy of some in-depth policy discussion downstream on the things that we can amend. But the bottom line consequence is the state code goes into effect January, and we're pretty much obligated to adopt it. So I think we've got a reasonable course of action that we could take. How to put that into a motion, I don't really know, other than what the city attorney said.
Well, your motion, if the council wants to adopt it, your motion is just to adopt and wait for the reading of the ordinance. And then the second part of that is give direction to the city manager to undertake this type of review and set up study sessions for the council to go through and look at areas of the code where you can streamline, where you can pull things out, where you might want to adjust your policy on that.
Just, again, maybe I'm slow absorbing this tonight. On, okay, the state codes,
Yes.
they're there. Have we made substantive restrictions on the state code that are in here?
I think the major one that we've added restrictions on relate to the fire sprinklers in mobile homes placed on a permanent foundation. Other than that, I don't think there are significant.
That's, because you said if we're more restrictive,
Yeah.
we could change it later to go back to state code?
You can roll it back to the state code.
Let me ask you about this mobile homes on a permanent, because you just mentioned a permanent foundation. Would this ordinance make it a requirement that if somebody has their manufactured home not on a permanent foundation, but they sell their home, and as part of the requirement for funding, they have to get a 433, a permanent foundation, are they going to be required at that time to put sprinklers in, or is this just new construction moving forward?
It's new installations.
So it's going to be a brand new manufactured home that's being installed on a lot, not something that's existing,
Right, because if you,
that's put on a permit.
right, if you remember 4 weeks ago when we talked about this, the state of California are already mandates that any manufactured homes in the state of California be manufactured with them already installed. What it would do is to prevent someone from buying one in Arizona or Colorado and bringing it into the city of Hemet, or a used one.
So it's new construction.
Correct.
New installations.
But that new installation, so if somebody buys a 2011 manufactured home and they install it on a vacant lot in Hemet, they're going to be required to put sprinklers in it.
Yes, but effectively they wouldn't be able to put that 2,000.
Why not?
Because it's impractical to retrofit sprinklers into mobile homes because of the HCD requirements.
So if I were to buy a vacant lot in Hemet, and so instead of spending $150,000 on a new manufactured home from one of our dealers here in town, and I buy one from somebody else that's a little older to save money, because let's be real, the people that hire contractors that are cheaper, that don't do the work properly, it's because they're cheaper, and people are cheap because that's what they want to save a buck. So if I buy this older manufactured home to put on a lot that I own in the city, I'm going to be required to put sprinklers in there. Or is it going to be just homes built that are brand new? If it's new construction, i.e. that it's being put on a lot, then yes, it's going to be required to have sprinklers under this code. Even if it's a 2013 model year. Well, as I say, in effect, it would be prohibiting those older mobile homes from going in. It would be infeasible, impractical, exorbitantly expensive to upgrade those mobile homes with a sprinkler system. Are the manufactured home builders building them with sprinklers now? Yes, because the state requires that. Do they have any that don't have sprinklers in them that they're still selling? In other states, yes. But none in California. Well, the ones manufactured in California have to, and to be installed here, have to meet those requirements. So if there's one of our manufactured home builders has one that's on their lot that hasn't been sold yet, could not be put in Hemet under this code if it doesn't already have sprinklers. Correct. Just wanted to be clear with that.
Let me just add that since 2011, it's been a requirement to install them when they're manufactured. So it would be any ones that are older than 2011 that might not have them in.
And that's not just for site-built homes, that's for manufactured homes also. Okay.
Okay, so before we go any further, I have someone that wants to speak, and even though we've opened and closed the public hearing, since we just have one, I'm going to go ahead and allow Debbie to speak. I'll open the public hearing.
I'm picking up on Michael's concerns. I'm also from a realtor family, and I know the older homes are in a really bad situation right now because they're really hard to sell. They're really hard to insure. I have a friend who's in the hospital right now. She doesn't even know who to give her mobile home to when she dies. Because who has the money to pay the rent while it sits there hoping to get sold? There's an entire liability of all the homes that are in Hemet that are in mobile home parks right now, that when I first got here and I started trying to get back to my career, I was actually talking with somebody from Skyline and trying to figure out how to go in and do marketing to the existing parks here to upgrade their homes with newer homes and bring your property tax base up. I got kind of caught sideways with the other tax stuff, but the RDA collapse and the homes that are getting built, they're not all big giant cookie cutter monopoly builders. Sometimes you just want a little one lot. You guys have a lot of those lots, and Sacramento doesn't really plan that way when they're upgrading all their maps. They're just rolling through and upgrading everything what's convenient for them. But you guys have a lot of single lots that aren't developed, and if you want to raise your property taxes and everything like that, offering incentives and discounts on fees is what's going to get your individual home builders back into that market. They're not coming in rolling 10 or 20 homes at a time. They're one at a time. That market's really been lost in real estate, and a lot of that comes from the databases and the digitalization of the industry. But that's not what made Hemet unique. And specifically with mobile homes in this area, there's just a lot of mobile homes that are really outdated in this area. And so if you really want to cherish your community and the unique situation you have here, Sacramento is not thinking of you and what you guys want for your community. So it's just something. Fire sprinklers are great for firemen. Thank you.
Go ahead and close the public hearing.
May I offer a clarification for the benefit of council and for the
Yes.
person that just spoke? Again, this only applies to homes put on a permanent foundation. So mobile homes in a mobile home park where the space is rented, this does not apply to those. So I think that most of the situations that she's describing, this does not affect them.
Whoever owns that house.
You can't speak from the floor. Thank you.
Something I would like to point out, because I know that it's specific mobile home parks that are regulated under HCD.
Correct.
There's a lot of areas. Sierra Dawn has a lot of homes that are on their own lot that are not on permanent foundations.
Correct.
And there's a lot of them throughout the city, there's a lot of manufactured homes not on permanent foundations.
Again, it's determined by the type of park that it is and whether or not, like you would go out and purchase an individual lot outside of a park of any type and put it there. That's most of the situations where this is going to apply. There are a couple of parks where they sell a lot and then those are placed on permanent foundations, but that's unusual in the number of RV parks or mobile home parks that we have here. So most all of the parks, this requirement does not apply to them. If they're renting a space, or even if they bought their own lot and they're just placing a mobile home on it, not on a permanent foundation, this doesn't apply. Correct?
So I think you can't speak from the floor, please.
So to touch on what Linda said, basically the major change or restriction that we're adding in to this from the state mandate would be the manufactured homes requiring sprinklers on a permanent foundation. Is that what I'm?
Yes.
But all the other stuff that's in this is our own ordinances that we could then look at a later time.
For the most part, yes.
And I think we all are on the same page about this. with regards to, we really need to look at some of these things and come up with some policy that we can all live with. And there's obviously certain things now that,
And that our developers can live with.
yeah, and
Well,
developers can live with.
So I can tell you this, from the way this sits right now, I'm not for it, the way it reads today. However, I could get behind it if it was to go ahead with the state required mandates and the significant change in the manufactured home. If it was that, I can get behind it. But as far as a lot of the other stuff, I think that needs to be looked at from a policy standpoint.
Okay, so,
And that stuff we can do it.
and that's stuff we
Stuff
can
we
do
do later.
after the first of the year. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you want to make a motion, Michael?
All right, so then I will move that we adopt the state mandated building code requirements and our additional requirement based on staff's comments with regards to the manufactured homes, and then that we come back at a later date and look at, from a policy standpoint, the rest of the ordinance that's in here. Do you need
Do you have a second?
any clarification? You need anything else? That's my,
I'm looking at legal, can we,
Not yet.
that passes muster as far as coming back and changing.
Well, what your motion is essentially to adopt the state building codes as they are with your one climatic topographical change, and not adopt anything else that might be of a local nature, even if it's been in your code for a while. So
Well,
I have to go
the
back
code
and...
wouldn't change. The current code's not going to change.
No, the current code will go away.
Right.
The new state code goes into effect.
Right.
And then you
But our
have to adopt,
ordinances are not going to change.
but it's been part of your building code that goes into effect.
Since it's in the building codes and that is being replaced in its entirety, any things that we've done for years would be removed by the action that you're suggesting.
I think the initial idea was that we pass it with the idea that we come back after the first of the year and change those policies that we see fit, that need to be looked at and the restrictive clauses. So.
If I may, Mayor.
Correct?
That's what I recommend that
Yeah.
you do, so you have a uniform code.
If I may, Mayor, I think staff would be unclear as to what policies would apply
Well, we're
that's
gonna
been
have to come back and
suggested.
just.
So
and
we would
decide that.
request that perhaps you consider going forward with this and then set a time to review those things, primarily as I hear it related to fees and permit requirements. And again, being concerned about providing consistency not only for the development community but for staff, so that we know what the code would be, and then we can schedule that to come back and say, these are the things that you've expressed concerns about. Correct?
I agree with that, because the issue that then gets created is what Eric mentioned, and so the staff can have some time, approving the item that's before you will provide us the opportunity to come back at a future date, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, and do some of that nitty-gritty work that was identified here. We don't want to be left in a position where we have nothing else that essentially can be enforced with respect to what's before you today.
And I think the staff can do, with that in mind, can do a clearer job of separating what's imposed by the state, what's open for you, and what you've imposed over the years that's free to adjust.
Yeah. Do you want to amend your motion, Michael?
No, I'm going to leave it like it is if nobody seconds it.
Yeah, except that we have to do the first reading tonight, based on, we don't have to, adopt the
Yes.
ordinance tonight.
And that would allow the city to come back, revisit this item based on the direction provided to council, and explore those other items that was all conveyed, I think, collectively from all members of the council.
Okay. No, make the motion. Go ahead. Yeah, it just,
So, before that, Councilmember Percival did make a motion. I'm assuming.
There was no
Lori
second.
would say there was no second, so that motion fails for lack of a second.
Right.
Now the floor is open again.
okay.
Give it a shot.
I will make a motion to approve this as presented tonight, and to come back in January and revisit those items that are more restrictive than the new building codes imposed by the state, and to look at all of the other ordinances and requirements that the city has put into play over the past years, to create a document that is updated and something we like. Come on, second it.
I think you said what I was thinking, and it's consistent with the city attorney's recommendation.
Back and fix, or change, not fix, change, have discussion and change the items that we have.
That we
all
have
brought up.
the discretionary items
Right,
that are local.
yes, without losing any of the rules and regs we've been playing by for 20, 30 years.
On that basis, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Oh. Yeah.
We gotta do what we gotta do for now. Thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 9, discussion action items. 9A, resolution approving the purchase and installation of 4 electric vehicle charging stations and purchase 2 electric vehicles. Chris, well,
I think Chris is going to provide the introduction for this agenda item, so I will hand it over to Chris.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. You have heard me say the name Avi Barron before, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce her. She is our executive analyst for the Public Works Department. She is not a myth. She exists, and she's kind of my little secret weapon. So tonight she's going to go ahead and walk you through some good news about a project that we hope that you'll approve, that we can get going here in the city. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss Abby, and I'm going to move the mic.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the council. Thank you for the opportunity for me to present this product to you. I'm very excited about being able to do that for you this evening, to discuss electric charging stations as well as possible vehicle purchases for the city of Hemet. You're welcome. And we're going to go through the big one. Do I just arrow?
I'm sorry, Av. Yes, you got it.
On July 10th, 2018, the City Council approved Resolution 4820, authorizing the city's participation in the Mobile Source Air Pollution Reduction Review Committee, also being referred from this point forward as MSRC Local Government Partnership Program, or LGPP. The city is eligible to receive funding reimbursements towards a portion of the costs associated with purchasing electric charging stations, as well as a portion of the cost for purchasing electric vehicles to add to the fleet. As a result of our application, the city of Hemet was awarded $30,000 in match funding, $10,000 to go towards electric vehicle charging stations, and $20,000 to go towards the purchase of electric vehicles. The balance of the project, the remaining balance of the project, will be supported by City AB 2766 subvention funding, which is currently available and has already been approved as an acceptable use of those funds by AQMD. The following project that I'm presenting to you is a wonderful opportunity for the city to partner with AQMD, improve overall quality of air within the city limits, and then transition the city's fleet to lower emission vehicles, as well as provide the public additional access to electric charging vehicle stations within city limits with no impact to the city's general fund. Following the authorization from Council to participate in LGPP, staff originally submitted for a project to purchase 2 vehicles, 2 light-duty zero-emission fleet vehicles, as well as the purchase of 2 electric vehicle charging stations. One initially projected to be installed at the public library, and then one to be located right here at City Council chambers. Since the time of the project's original submission, staff, through discussion with other departments, including Building and Safety, the Police Department, Fleet Services, discovered that the installation of a single electronic vehicle charging station at any location requires that that specific parking space be designed and dedicated to ADA access. This presented an issue and an obstacle because that limits the usage to only ADA access EV users and excludes the use by non-ADA motorists, and then it would require additional parking space beyond the standard parking stall. In discussion with other city departments, it was talked about that the best and greatest service to the public would be to install 2 public use charging stations at the library. And in addition to that, requests for 2 additional purchases of 2 additional charging stations to be located at the police department and another one at the city courtyard. In regards to the electric vehicles, which I spoke of, and speaking with the departments that would be utilizing these vehicles, the best presentation was to look into purchasing 2019 Nissan Leaf Plus hatchback vehicles. These are zero-emission vehicles that will be used by the Police Department Records Division and by Public Works. The first vehicle will replace a current vehicle that's used by the Police Department Records Department and has exceeded its useful life as a frontline vehicle. And then the second vehicle we're requesting purchase will replace Unit 7029, which is a 2005 Ford F-150 that is currently being used by Public Works and has also exceeded its useful life as a frontline vehicle. Our intent is to replace those with the zero-emission vehicles, and then the other 2 vehicles to be repurposed for another department's use once these new vehicles have been purchased and put into service. The vehicle purchase, the portion project for the purchase of the vehicles will be fully funded through LGPP in conjunction with AB 2766 funding. So the cost for one vehicle is $35,000. $20,000 was awarded to us by LGPP, which means that $10,000 for each vehicle is allocated, and then the remaining balance of $50,755 would be supplemented through AB 2766 funding. Again, no impact to the general fund. These are monies that we have available up to us for use, and that we could use to purchase these vehicles to add to our fleet. So the total purchase amount for the 2 vehicles would be $70,755 and some change. In regards to the EV charging stations, with the recommendation of 2 stations for public access, these would be located on the north side of the parking lot at the public library. They would support the ADA and a standard parking stall for these charging station areas. And then this section of the project will be fully funded through LGBP as well as AB 2766 again. For the stations at the library, the cost for the project for purchasing the equipment as well as labor and installation, the total cost would be $20,624, all covered by both those funding sources. And then the 2 additional stations that staff is requesting for the non-public access, these would be to support the 2 vehicles that we would be purchasing. We have a need to charge those fleet vehicles. One station was recommended to be right here at the police department in the non-public area, and then the second non-public access station would be at the courtyard. These 2 stations that are non-public access will be fully funded through AB 2766, and they're not subject to the contract terms of the LGPP program because we're just utilizing subvention funds for the purchase of these 2 non-public access charging stations. The following table, as you see here, kind of gives council as well as members of the public a breakdown of the costs and the funding sources. So as you can see, I've thrown out a lot of numbers to you, and it may sound a little scary because there is a lot of project money. But again, keeping in mind that our funding sources will be LGPP as well as AB 2766 subvention portions that will cover the cost of the total project. So nothing coming out of general funds or any other funding that we have through the city. There's a more detailed breakdown of the installation costs and the labor costs that is included in the staff report for you if you'd like to review that. In order for this city to participate in LGPP and receive that $30,000 in reimbursable funds, SCAQMD requires that we enter into contract ML 18154, which was included in the staff report, and it requires that the city provide a funding match. And we were able to verify that the AB 2766 subvention funds would qualify as those match funds. So there's no additional monies that come out. They would combine so that they could meet that match funding. In terms of operational requirements per the contract, the vehicles and the charging stations must be fully operational for a minimum of 3 years. They will also be requiring us to place the MSRC logo in the form of a decal that MSRC will provide to us, and then as it wears down, they would replace that as well. It's just so that we can promote and highlight that we have partnered with MSRC and that they've helped us with the co-funding of the project. They will also ask us to do a public outreach plan, and that's so that we can create awareness in the community. That can be done through social media posting, through mailings that are sent out to the community, through newspaper articles that are published. And then in terms of reporting requirements, we are subject to quarterly progress reports that we'll submit once the contract has been executed. We'll be able to provide MSRC with an up-to-date of the things that the tasks that we're accomplishing to meet towards our project goals, the expected delivery dates of the stations as well as the vehicles, and then they're also requiring a final report, and AQMD has that format which we will fill out and submit to them at the end of the project. It will also highlight any possible challenges that we may face, but more importantly, highlight how this project is beneficial to the community and how our partnership has benefited the city of Hemet. per council's direction and in an effort to ensure that we're doing our due diligence in negotiating contract terms that are in the best interest of the city. Contract 18154 was submitted to the city attorney's office for review. They then came back with comments that were submitted to SCAQMD, and the response from SCAQMD was to reject the proposed modifications that the city attorney's office had suggested. And their reasoning was that their policy is to keep their contracts consistent with all agency participants. Lastly, staff is recommending that we pursue a separate agreement with a third-party point-of-sale transaction provider. What that means is those stations that we have for public use, we need a transaction provider that will be able to, that will allow the customer to register an account online through their smartphone, on their phone, to bill their credit card for the use of the charging station. That way the city is recouping costs for the electricity costs. The transaction provider then issues payment to the city minus their transaction fees, and then there's no cost to the city. The city currently uses a third-party vendor for the City Hall charging station. With the pursuit of a separate agreement, we'd like to incorporate all of the new stations that are coming on board.
I was going to ask about that. I would imagine, since the one at City Hall was implemented several years ago, the new charging stations obviously are more updated and probably more efficient. So, can the new cars function well with the older charging station that we already have? Or does it have to be retrofitted? The one at the City Hall would have to be retrofitted to better accommodate the newer vehicles on the road.
I believe the one that's currently at City Hall will be able to charge any new vehicles at a later date. If we need the upgrade, we can pursue other funding sources. But as it stands right now, that station at City Hall can support the charging of these new 2019 vehicles.
So, since this is for police, fortunately, the library is not too far from the police station, so that's not an issue. It's not like it's in their, it's kind of in their backyard, so that's good. But if we have a charging station that's open to the public, do we have a minimum hour that will be required, or I mean, not a minimum hour that they are allowed to charge? If somebody's in the library all day, are they going to be charging all day?
There might be some confusion about where things are a little bit. So I'm just going to jump in real quick. So I think you're asking how is PD going to charge their vehicle if somebody's at the library?
Right.
So if you go back, Avi, and take a look at the location. So part of our solution and part of what Abby had described in requesting 2 additional stations in addition to what we were initially going to get was we're actually going to place one. So there's the library. So these will be the 2 public access.
Okay.
If you go then to the next slide, the area on the left, you're looking at the police station, right, Abby? And you're actually looking at a spot behind the gate that's reserved for police use.
Okay.
And then the same at the corporate yard. That's actually my parking spot that will be the electric vehicle
So
charging
4
station.
stations, 2 cars.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you this. Since there is, and has been funding for charging stations, and mostly through South Coast AQMD, would we be eligible to apply through the California Energy Commission for funding retroactively?
I don't know the answer
I don't have an answer for you,
Okay.
but I am more than happy to look into that and provide a response at a later time for you. Definitely something that we should be pursuing and looking into.
So, and I'll tell you, I'm really glad that we're going to consider more charging stations within the community. And I honestly think that the library is probably a good place for that, for the two anyway, public ones. So I always worry about the other one at times. And I don't even know how much that's used, but is that the only one what other one do we have besides the one at City Hall?
There is a non-public one at the courtyard currently.
Okay.
No, you're absolutely right. So the city of Hemet was actually one of the first cities to take on an electric vehicle. And the charging station that we have out there is kind of a bit back to the future, if you will. So actually one of the spots that we'll be plugging in at the courtyard will be kind of almost a plug and play. We'll be able to pull off that old station. Everything now is universal. Abby was absolutely right. The charging stations we have at City Hall were put in after those universal plugs came through the car industry, so I don't even know that we'll have upgrades until there's kind of a massive change throughout the industry. But if you want to see an ancient electric vehicle charger, stop by the corporate yard. We can show you one for a while.
Okay. No, I don't really want to see one. Okay. Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council have any questions on this? Yeah, time and way.
Thank you for this. So again, no city funds to pay for this. That's a good thing. So I asked Chris to give us some numbers from the charging stations that we currently have at City Hall on the usage of it. And the numbers are depressing. Very depressing. And so here's my question, and this might be a question for Chris, is so we're replacing two vehicles that are beyond their life expectancy use. What are the annual operating costs currently on those two vehicles that we're going to replace in comparison to the cost of these? Now, I know this is not city money, but it's still public money. I mean, it's grant money, it's taxpayer dollars. It's not, and I'm glad that we're bringing money back into City Hemet. Trust me, I'm glad we're bringing it in here. The problem that I have is that the cost of these vehicles and the cost over the life of them, because we've got to pay the electric bill, correct? Because they're not, these charging stations don't operate off of solar.
So in the case of the two stations, the one at the police department and the one at the corporate yard that'll be used for fleet, yes, you do. In the case of the public charging stations, just like we have now at City Hall, the third-party point of sale agreement allows us to recoup the electric costs. We actually established some fees a few years back, minus a small, I think it's a 3% transaction fee. So in terms of the cost of electricity on the public use stations, for the most part, we're recovering that cost.
So if somebody for instance, takes their Tesla or their Nissan Leaf and plugs it in, they got to put their credit card in
Yes,
to be able to get
they have to have an account. It's not
no problem with that. I think that's fair, because every time I go to the gas station, I got to put my credit card in,
right.
and I'm being taxed heavily. Are these vehicles charged a per mile tax, or are they being taxed at the pump per se when you're pumping electricity into these vehicles?
You ready?
Or
So what I know from the small bit of homework I've done personally is that because these electric vehicles are not paying things like gas tax, that I think there are some higher taxes associated or higher fees associated with them at the onset of their purchase. But in terms of what we're doing at our electric vehicle charging stations, the city council has established a fee. It's $2 for the first 2 hours. I mean, it's a minimal amount of juice that goes into these things. And then so much per hour after that. We haven't, council hasn't, beyond what was established in 2013? I think it was 2013. We haven't changed the fees since then. This is something we can definitely look at if you want to bring back. The use initially was very high, and I apologize I didn't answer this question or comment to this. The use initially was, I think, higher when we first put them in because it was kind of new and exciting. One of the things I think with these public stations in particular is there are a number of websites and groups, WRCOG being involved in many of them, where you get yourself on the list of infrastructure, so as people are driving around and they're running out of their 150 miles on their charge, they know where they can swing in.
Well, and honestly, I think, in all fairness, the one at City Hall, people are going to really use that because it's at City Hall.
You want to know? I have the numbers.
If you come in, no, but I'm talking that, and how much do we advertise that? Now, I know you can go on and find your apps, and your app tells you exactly where any charging station is. But, how many, unless it's an employee who's at City Hall all day long, nobody's going to come in off the street to come into City Hall to charge their car unless they're really doing something downtown and they don't mind walking around for a while.
So I'll tell you, one of our biggest users, and she may still be today, was somebody who worked in the healthcare industry here. So she would park her car, charge her car, walk to work, and maybe come back at lunch and get it. The other, we have actually seen a Tesla or two plugged in. I know you wouldn't believe that, but it does happen. But it's not very frequent. We haven't had a boatload of users.
It's not right out in the open. I mean, where people would be aware.
No, but there is signage. We did put signage up, but we probably definitely could do a better job of kind of renewing and reminding people. I think in terms of the library location, there's a lot that happens on the north side of Florida, and you've got downtown and the shops. I think that you're probably going to see a heavier use there, and we'll definitely make sure that we go big on public education and celebrating that site when it's in place, and making sure the word gets out. So,
Yeah, I think it's important for us to recognize that we're making this available to an industry that's still in its infancy, and it hasn't really caught on yet. One of the things that I think is going to help it catch on is the universal plug adapters. Unlike cell phones, every time you have to upgrade your cell phone, you have to throw away your charger because they change the connector on it. So I think that that's a good industry decision that they're making, certainly enough. But I think it's a unique opportunity for us to reiterate what we started historically with the availability of a charging station, and it shows some progressive thinking and opportunity exists in an old town.
Right.
So it's all good stuff as far as I'm concerned, even though I probably will never have an electric car. I like the sound of gasoline engine. That's just me.
And
I'm old.
Councilmember Percival, we definitely can take a look at what the costs of the vehicles that we're taking out of the daily use are versus, and then kind of monitor moving forward what those equipment maintenance costs will be on the electric vehicles for you. So,
Thank you. I think that's important for the taxpayers. But here's the thing. I mean, electric vehicles it's a big political issue because of global warming, greenhouse gas emissions. The list goes on. I don't buy into it because I know for a fact that the emissions caused by electric vehicles far exceed an internal combustion engine, the amount of fuel. Because, and here's part of the problem that I have with electric vehicles is that, especially in California, is that now that the electric companies are shutting the power off, if you've got a dead battery in your car and now the power's off, you can't go anywhere.
This might not be a bad thing.
Wow.
Electricity's not even gonna pump gas either. Yeah, that's true.
There may have been a meme or two out there
So,
that
I mean,
represented
it's-
that thought, so.
I'm not opposed because there's something for everybody, and I know there's people out there that love electric vehicles. It's not for me. I can go 450 miles on my car, and it takes 5 minutes to fill up the tank, and I can go another 450 miles. Whereas this, you can go, 200 miles on a charge?
Depends on what you spend
So,
on the car.
I mean, it's become a political back and forth. And there's people out there that love them. I think Teslas are a pretty awesome car. If I had the money to buy one, if I had money just laying around to buy one, I'd probably buy one because it's kind of cool. You got an iPad Pro sitting as your dash, right? But my concerns are that we've spent a lot of money on the electric charging stations at City Hall, and I've looked at the numbers, how many charges have been, how many times people have plugged into it, and we need to get the word out.
And just as a reminder that the charging stations at City Hall were also covered fully by grant funds. So there was no general fund money used for those.
So
But
That's what
I
gives me
understand
less
your point.
heartburn.
Yes.
So I understand we do not have any requests to speak on this item, so I'll ask the council members if they're ready to make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve this item.
I'll second.
Please vote. Still not, it was approved 3-1.
Abby, thank you very much for a very nice presentation, too.
Thank you.
Abby, great job.
Does anybody have a burning desire to do this course? You okay with skipping the report? Sure. Okay. In lieu of that late hour.
It's going to take me 45 minutes for the next meeting.
Does any city council member have a future agenda item? Hearing none. This meeting is adjourned until December 10th at 7 o'clock. And happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Be safe. Thank you.